Hello there, this is Prashant Solomon, and this is my second video of my near death experiences and the afterlife series. Today, we're going to be talking to you about death and the actual moment of death. Now, death is something that people have worried about for a long time. People wonder what it's going to be when they actually pass over into the out of this body. And from what we've heard from people who've had near death experiences is that death itself is actually a very painless and quick process. Many people have described it as simply floating out of the body and feeling a sense of weightlessness. Now, people have also said that when they actually float out of their body and they look back, they can actually see their body, but the body doesn't really seem very important to them anymore. The very moment that you leave this physical body and you look back, at times people say that they can recognize it as their own body, but it doesn't really seem like them anymore, because they sort of recognize that their true identity is that of the soul. So the first thing is that the actual process of death is generally very quick and very painless. Some people have described it as simply floating out of their body like a balloon. Some people have said that it also feels like at times being kind of sucked out like by a vacuum cleaner, or just kind of falling out of the body and just floating out. So there are different things that different people have experienced, but generally they say that it's a very painless process, and they still feel absolutely aware of everything that's going on. People who have been in hospitals when they've had their near death experience actually can see and hear the doctors and nurses trying to revive them, and they actually even try to talk to those doctors and nurses and say that, look, we're still here, we're still alive, but those people can obviously not hear them. Now, after this, many people say that they've actually floated around and been able to go to the next room and see some of their relatives that are waiting for them outside of maybe the operation theater or something like that. There have been cases when people have floated outside of the hospital window and have actually seen a shoe. There was a case where a lady actually saw a shoe lying on one of the ledges of the hospital, and when she came back, she actually mentioned that, and when they actually went to look, they found that there was actually a shoe there, exactly the way she described. So obviously, there is enough evidence in terms of what people have said, what they've experienced, what they've seen. A lot of people have actually very accurately described what doctors and nurses were doing, what the family members were doing or saying. This very famous book called Heaven is for Real by I think Burpo describes that his son, when he had the near-death experience, actually saw the father in a room or a chapel of the hospital and was praying. So yeah, there have been a lot of cases where people have described things about what others are doing, and it's very obvious that the actual moment of death or the actual process of death is something that everyone describes as very painless and very quick and very natural. It's just like almost like just floating out of the body. So it's sort of like the way you take off your clothes at night to change your clothes. It's pretty much like the soul sort of takes off the body but yet still exists. And let me tell you, I have had a near-death, not exactly a near-death experience, but something very similar. I actually remember my death in my last life, and I have described that incident to my parents, and I actually remember entering into my body in this life. And when I told them about what they were doing when I actually entered this body, they were pretty amazed, because that they actually did that at one time. They were holding hands and singing in a market, in New Delhi in a place called South Extension Market, and I described what my mother was wearing, or what my father was wearing. And so let me just, I'm sort of digressing off here, but before that memory, I actually remember my death in my last life. And I remember being like in a kind of a monastery, and I was a monk, sometime probably in the 14th or 15th century, somewhere in Europe. I died when I was pretty old. I remember lying down on a bed, and I could see my hand. It was white. I was a white person, and there was a young brother holding my hand and crying in some language which I can't really identify it today, but somehow I know what he said, although I can't repeat it because I don't remember what language that was. But what that actually meant was goodbye, father. And the next thing I remember is that I was just floating out of my body, and I was looking down, and I could see I could see my dead body, I could see my face, and I was an old man, and I felt absolutely peaceful. It was completely peaceful, no pain, no problem. And then I look in the corner of the room, and in the upper corner of the room, I could see a light. And I just went into that light, and I don't remember what happened next. The next thing I do remember, however, is that I'm coming down the clouds, kind of like Google Earth when you just zoom down. And there I saw my mom and dad, and I just kept going closer towards my mother's stomach. But that is something that we can talk about in one of our future videos. This particular video was just about the actual process of death, the moment of death. And once again, we can look at it and say, you feel like you're floating out of the body. You feel, you look at the body and it doesn't really seem to be you, although you know it was your body. It's completely painless and peaceful and pretty sudden. You feel a sense of weightlessness, that you can sort of float around and move much quicker and easier. And people have described actually, floating through doors and windows and things like that. So perhaps death is not as bad as we think it is. And it even gets better, because when people go through the tunnel, they actually feel a sense of peace and love, and something that they've never experienced before on earth. So stay tuned and wait for the next video. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.